Welcome to Dor Lador, Jewish History and Culture. Dor Lador means from generation to generation, and that is precisely the journey we are on. Join us as we travel across centuries and continents to uncover the remarkable people, places, traditions, and ideas that built Jewish civilization. From ancient roots to modern realities, this is where the Jewish story comes alive.
Imagine a vibrant global movement today. I mean, we are talking about tens of thousands of deeply devoted followers, massive annual pilgrimages that shut down entire city grids, just an incredibly active, breathing community.
Right, a really powerful modern presence.
Exactly. But there's a massive catch. The man leading this movement, like the absolute sole authority giving all the orders, has been dead for over 200 years. There is no successor. There's no, new CEO taking the reins. It is just a dead man leading from the grave.
It completely defies everything we know about how human institutions are supposed to work. Because, when a powerful founder dies, history shows us that one of two things inevitably happens, right?
Right, usually a power struggle.
Exactly. Either the inner circle immediately crowns a new leader to keep the momentum going, or the power vacuum causes the entire movement to fracture, splinter, and eventually just dissolve into the footnotes of history.
But the people we are looking at in our deep dive today, they basically threw that historical rulebook right out the window.
They really did.
When their leader passed away, the tragically young age of 38, and he was just ravaged by tuberculosis at the time, his impact had been so profoundly earth-shattering that his followers made a radical decision.
A completely unprecedented decision.
Yeah. They flat out refused to ever appoint a replacement. They essentially looked around and said, our leader is irreplaceable, so we simply won't replace him. And this decision actually earned them a striking nickname in the history books, right?
Yeah, they were called the Dead Hasidim.
The Dead Hasidim. It's such a heavy title.
It is. And the figure at the center of this whole historical anomaly is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who lived from 1772 to 1810.
Okay, so late 18th, early 19th century.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to trace his incredibly short, explosive life. We're basing this on a wealth of sources, including his own complex writings, the meticulous biographical accounts left by his followers, and broader historical records of the era.
So we have a really solid documentary trail to follow.
We do. And we are going to follow his trajectory from this isolated, deeply struggling child who was born into what you could call the ultimate spiritual royalty, all the way to his final days as a revolutionary thinker. A thinker who forever altered the landscape of both psychology and mysticism.
What really hooked me in our sources is exactly how he got to that revolutionary stage. It wasn't through, serene meditation on a mountaintop.
Far from it.
Right. It was through intense, brutal inner turmoil. He battled what we would absolutely diagnose today as severe clinical depression.
Oh, without a doubt.
And instead of hiding it, which you'd expect a religious leader to do, he forged a radical path out of it. He pioneered this philosophy of active joy, of raw personal vulnerability, and perhaps most surprisingly, of psychological storytelling.
Which is why his life is not just some dusty historical biography for you to listen to passively. The issues he was wrestling with back in the late 18th century, they are the exact same issues driving modern psychological discourse today.
Yeah, in an age of absolute information overload, of modern anxiety, where everyone is desperately trying to, curate this flawless, perfect digital image. His 200-year-old teachings feel shockingly urgent.
They really pierce through all that noise.
They do. We are talking about emotional authenticity, finding light in the darkest possible places, and treating joy not just as this fleeting emotion that happens to you, but as a rigid, active daily discipline.
It is practical, survival-level spirituality. But, to understand the tools he created to survive, we first have to understand the immense, crushing weight of the world he was born into.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to set the scene for you. The year is 1772. The place is Medzibish, which is a town in present-day Ukraine.
Right.
And Nachman is born into a family that our sources describe as the ultimate spiritual aristocracy. I'm talking about a bloodline so revered it's almost mythical.
Yeah, and to really grasp the weight of that bloodline, we have to zoom out just a bit and look at the Jewish world in Eastern Europe at that specific time.
Okay, paint the picture.
So, prior to this era, spiritual life in these communities had become incredibly rigid, highly stratified, and deeply, deeply academic. The religious elite were these brilliant scholars who spent all day poring over complex legal texts.
Leaving the everyday working class people, the farmers, the blacksmiths, the merchants, feeling completely locked out of the spiritual experience.
Exactly.
Like if you didn't have the time or the high-level education to read the dense texts, you were basically made to feel second class.
Precisely. And then, just a few decades before Nachman was born, a man known as the Baal Shem Tov steps onto the stage.
And he changes everything.
He really does. He launches this massive, vibrant spiritual revolution called Hasidism, and he preached that God wasn't just found in dusty library books. God was in the fields, in the music, in the simple, honest prayer of a working person.
So it's a very populist movement.
Exactly. He argued that joy and emotional connection were actually superior to cold, rigid academia, and it caught fire. It completely swept through Eastern Europe.
And here is where the intense pressure comes in for our guy. Because the Baal Shem Tov, this legendary founder of this massive continent-spanning movement, was Nachman's great-grandfather.
Yep. No pressure.
Right. And his mother, Fega, was the founder's granddaughter, who was known for her own deep mystical abilities. Plus, his father, Simcha, was the son of another highly prominent mystical master.
So Nachman wasn't just born into a prominent family. He was the genetic culmination of the movement's absolute elite.
So if we put this in modern terms for you, it's like being the direct heir to a global dynasty. You were born, and there's immediately this heavy, invisible crown placed on your head. You don't get to just be a kid.
Oh, absolutely not.
Everyone, the community, the elders, your parents, they're all looking at you from the moment you take your first steps, waiting for you to perform miracles, waiting for you to be a prodigy.
And the psychological burden of that expectation is staggering. I mean, most people in that position choose one of two paths. They either buckle under the pressure and rebel completely, just walk away, or they lean into the privilege. They coast.
Yeah, the classic Nepo baby route.
Exactly. They let the family name open every door, and they just offer a watered-down version of their ancestors' greatness.
But Nachman takes a completely different route. According to the sources, he possesses this overwhelming, almost frantic impulse to forge his own path. He is terrified of being unearned.
Right. It's fascinating.
Like a highly aggressive form of imposter syndrome. He didn't just feel like a fake, he viewed his inherited prestige as a literal spiritual poison. Like he wanted to prove that if you stripped away the royal bloodline entirely, he still had undeniable substance.
And this drive manifested in extreme, often highly solitary behaviors during his childhood. The historical accounts provide incredibly vivid details here.
Yeah, tell them about the pocket money.
Oh, this is great. We see a young boy who refuses to rely on his natural intelligence. He takes his own pocket money coins that other children would be spending on sweets or toys, and he uses it to secretly bribe his tutors.
He is paying them for extra hours of punishing, intense study.
Yeah.
Long after all the other kids have gone home to play.
And he pushes his physical body just as hard. He begins practicing secret fasts. He would intentionally deny himself food, hiding his hunger from his parents as a way to conquer his physical desires and discipline his mind.
But the most striking image from the sources, the one that really stays with you, is his practice in the wilderness. A young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, slipping out of his warm, safe house in the dead of night. He walks alone into the freezing, dark Ukrainian forests to pray.
Just incredible.
I mean, the isolation, the biting cold, the sheer terror of being a child alone in an 18th century forest filled with wolves and bandits, it's unfathomable.
But he was deliberately seeking out the most vulnerable, raw environment possible.
Right, to test himself.
Exactly. Because in the warmth of his family's home, surrounded by people who constantly bowed to his great-grandfather's legacy, he couldn't know if his connection to the divine was real, or if it was just a product of his pampered environment. Wow.
But out there, alone, freezing in the dark, stripped of every comfort and title, whatever he found out there would belong entirely to him.
It's pure spiritual survivalism. He is breaking himself down to the studs to see if the foundation holds. And while he is engaged in this intense, solitary self-discovery, the cultural machinery of the era steps in.
Right, the timeline of his life moves fast.
Very fast. Following the rigid customs of 18th century Eastern Europe, this deeply introverted, intense boy is married off at the age of 13.
Which is shocking to a modern listener, but the arrangement of marriage at that age was standard practice, particularly for prominent families seeking to ally with wealth or other scholarly lineages.
Yeah.
So he was married to a young woman named Sashia, the daughter of a very wealthy landowner.
And this marriage triggers a major geographic shift. Following the wedding, the custom was for the young scholar to be supported by his wealthy father-in-law.
Right, the boarding arrangement.
Yeah, so Nachman moves away from the bustling, high-pressure environment of his hometown, and he relocates to Osatin, a rural village also in present-day Ukraine. And this relocation is vital. It physically removes him from the immediate shadow of his family's headquarters.
Right, he's off the radar a bit.
Exactly. In this quiet rural setting, financially supported and basically left to his own devices, he can plunge even deeper into his intense regimen of study, fasting, and that forest prayer.
But there is a crucial inflection point that happens right as this transition begins, on his actual wedding day. The very day this 13-year-old boy is entering into this arranged marriage, he has an encounter that changes the entire trajectory of his life.
Yes.
He meets a man named Shimon, and Shimon becomes his very first devoted follower.
And this moment cannot be overstated. Meeting Shimon is the fulcrum on which his entire existence pivots.
Let's explore why that is. I mean, he's 13. Why does one single follower matter so much to the narrative?
Because it fundamentally changes his spiritual geometry. Up until that exact moment, Nachman was a solitary ascetic. The boy in the freezing forest is only concerned with his own soul. He is just trying to save himself. But the moment another human being looks at you and says, "I believe in you, lead me," the entire dynamic shifts. You are no longer just responsible for your own spiritual survival. You are now carrying the weight of someone else's.
You transition from the student desperately treading water to the lifeguard who has to pull someone else up.
Exactly.
And that requires a completely different skill set. Shimon must have seen something incredible. Like he looked past a 13-year-old boy in a wedding suit and saw the raw, terrifying intensity of a master.
And by accepting Shimon as a disciple, Nachman was taking his first terrifying step into claiming his own authority. He was acknowledging that perhaps his grueling work in the forests had produced something of value that he could actually offer to others.
So this is the quiet, almost invisible birth of the movement. But as he steps into this role of a leader and a guide, the intense internal turbulence that drove him into the woods doesn't just magically disappear.
Oh, not at all.
It actually morphs into the defining characteristic of his philosophy.
Which really forces us to look closely at his psychological reality. If you examine the other religious leaders of his era, the established masters of the Hasidic movement, the cultural expectation was very clear.
Yeah, what was the vibe?
A true leader projects an image of absolute, unflappable serenity.
They were supposed to be above the fray, untouched by human weakness.
Right. The logic being, if you are deeply connected to God, if you understand all the secrets of the universe, why would you ever be sad? You should be a perfect, calm pond.
That was the standard operating procedure, a master on a pedestal. But Nachman's reality shattered that expectation completely. Modern historians, sociologists, and medical professionals who analyze his extensive writings and the biographical accounts left by his followers, they all point to the exact same conclusion.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
He suffered from profound, extreme emotional swings. The texts of the time called it melancholy, but looking at the symptoms, we would absolutely categorize it today as severe clinical depression.
Yes, and we are not talking about a fleeting moment of sadness or just having a bad day. We are talking about debilitating periods of paralyzing despair. Days where he felt completely devoid of light, totally crushed by a sense of distance from the divine, struggling to find a single reason to continue.
I have to play devil's advocate here because this seems like a massive liability.
Sure.
If you are building a movement and your core job description is to uplift your followers, inspire faith, and guide them to the light, doesn't admitting to crippling depression completely destroy your credibility?
It's a fair question.
I just imagine the rival leaders looking at him and laughing, saying, "Why are you following this guy? He's supposed to be holy, but he's more miserable than the rest of us."
You are echoing the exact arguments his critics used against him. I mean, from a traditional public relations standpoint, it was a disaster.
Right.
But Nachman did something totally unprecedented. Instead of hiding his mental anguish out of shame, instead of faking the serene smile of a perfect master, He weaponized his vulnerability.
Weaponized it.
He took his depression and he wove it directly into the core of his theology.
So he completely reframes the narrative. Instead of the darkness being a sign that he is broken or cursed, he argues the darkness is actually part of the machinery.
Exactly. He argued that doubt, feelings of worthlessness, and severe despair are not signs of spiritual failure. They are not punishments from God. They are mandatory stages of human growth.
Wow.
He taught his followers that a person must descend into the lowest, darkest places in order to discover the hidden light trapped down there.
It's the idea that muscle only grows when it is torn. The darkness tears you open, and if you survive it, your capacity to hold light increases.
That's a great way to put it. The only actual danger in his worldview is stagnation. Experiencing the despair is necessary, surrendering to it permanently is the trap.
Right, you have to keep moving.
And because he intimately knew exactly how deep and crushing that sadness could be, he arrived at his most famous and perhaps most misunderstood teaching.
Oh, yeah. Our sources highlight this prominently. He coined a maxim that has survived for 2 centuries. He said, "It is a great religious duty to always be happy."
And we have to be very careful here because to a modern listener, that sentence can sound incredibly dismissive.
Right. If you just read that on an inspirational poster, it sounds like the definition of toxic positivity. It sounds like some influencer telling you to just smile through the pain or good vibes only, which we know is psychologically damaging when you are dealing with real trauma.
Right, it minimizes the pain.
But the context here flips that entirely on its head.
Context is everything. This is not a superficial bumper sticker. This is a battle cry from a man intimately familiar with the abyss. When a leader who battles clinical depression looks you in the eye and says it is a duty to be happy, he is not telling you to cheer up.
No.
He is giving you a survival tactic.
He is saying, I know gravity is pulling you toward despair. I know the default state of the human mind in a hard world is anxiety. Therefore, joy is not a feeling that just happens to you. Joy is a weapon you have to pick up and wield.
And he emphasized the intense, active effort required to manufacture joy when you absolutely do not feel it, because he knew that intellectual arguments rarely work against depression.
Right, you can't outthink it.
Exactly, you can't logic your way out of the dark. So he prescribed physical behavioral interventions.
This is where his methods get really wild for the 18th century. He demanded that his followers use physical action to jumpstart their emotional state.
Right.
He told them to clap their hands, to play instruments, to sing at the top of their lungs. He even told them to embrace pure silliness, to act like a fool, to do a ridiculous dance, if that physical jolt was what it took to break the paralysis of sadness.
It is remarkably similar to the modern psychological practice of behavioral activation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the idea that if you wait until you feel like doing something, you will wait forever. You do the action first, you clap, you dance, you force the smile, and the physical movement creates a tiny crack in the armor of your depression, allowing a sliver of genuine emotion to enter.
And he didn't just stop at physical joy. He recognized that all these heavy emotions, the anger, the doubt, the fear, they needed an outlet. So he completely revolutionized how his followers communicated with the divine.
Yeah, and this practice really became the hallmark of his movement. While he strictly maintained the importance of the formal, traditional synagogue liturgy, the structured prayers recited in Hebrew at specific times of the day, he understood that formal structure has a major flaw.
The flaw being that it's scripted. If you are reading a script written by someone else centuries ago, you can hide behind the beautiful words.
Precisely. You put on your holy voice, but you aren't bringing your messy, authentic self to the encounter.
Right.
So Nachman popularized a supplementary practice, drawing heavily from his own childhood in the freezing forests. He called it Hitbodedut, which roughly translates to self-seclusion.
And the instructions for this practice are brilliantly simple, but incredibly difficult. He told his followers to go out into nature, a field, a forest, anywhere completely secluded.
Right, away from everyone.
And once they were entirely alone, they were to speak out loud to God, not in formal Hebrew, but in their everyday native language, the language they used to argue with the merchant in the market or chat with their family at the dinner table.
And the mandate was radical honesty. He told them to unburden their hearts without any filter or pretense. If you are furious, yell about your anger. If you are drowning in doubt, confess the doubt. If you are worried about your business, talk about the money.
Just imagine the visual of this. You have these 18th century men and women going out into the woods, finding a stump, and just talking out loud, completely unedited, as if they were sitting across from their most trusted best friend.
It's amazing.
No religious jargon, no trying to sound pious, just raw, unfiltered venting.
It was the ultimate form of psychological unburdening, just framed as a divine conversation. He realized that if you force people to use only pristine, holy language, they will repress their chaotic reality, and you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge.
Right.
By vocalizing their deepest anxieties in the woods, they were dragging their darkness out into the light.
So let's look at the board here. We have a young leader in his 20s who is rapidly dismantling the status quo. He's taking the stigma away from mental illness, he is turning joy into a physical discipline, and he's turning prayer into a raw therapy session. He is building something incredible.
He really is.
Yeah.
But for Nachman, all of this theory still felt incomplete.
Okay.
To truly cement his spiritual authority, to synthesize everything he was learning and reach the absolute zenith of understanding, he felt he couldn't stay in the familiar, relatively safe forests of Ukraine. He felt this burning compulsion to endure a physical crucible.
Which brings us to a massive turning point. The year is 1798. Nachman is 26 years old. He is a husband, he is a father to young children, and he's the center of a growing community that relies on him entirely.
Yep, he's established.
And out of nowhere, he announces that he has a non-negotiable spiritual imperative to travel to the land of Israel.
And we really need to hit pause and inject some major geopolitical context here, because modern listeners might hear travel to Israel and picture like a spiritual retreat or a bumpy but safe flight. This was 1798.
Right, in the absolute bloodiest middle of the Napoleonic Wars.
Exactly. Napoleon Bonaparte had launched his massive campaign in Egypt and Syria. The Ottoman Empire was fighting back fiercely, and the British Navy, led by figures like Admiral Nelson, was patrolling the Mediterranean, bombarding ports, and hunting French ships.
Chaos.
The entire region, the sea, the ports, the land routes, was a volatile, chaotic war zone.
So traveling into that meat grinder as a civilian, let alone an unarmed civilian from Eastern Europe who didn't speak the local languages, was essentially volunteering for a suicide mission.
His followers begged him not to go. His family pleaded with him.
Naturally.
But his internal conviction was absolute. He famously stated that he had to go, even if it meant he would take only one step in the Holy Land before dying. So he left his family and his community behind and began the journey.
And the journey is absolute terror. Our sources detail a harrowing sequence of events. He travels overland to the Black Sea, eventually securing passage on a wooden merchant ship. And they don't just face the threat of warships and pirates, they are hammered by violent, terrifying sea storms. At one point, the ship is tossed so violently, they believe it's going to splinter apart right there in the waves.
And it gets worse.
Yeah.
Due to the naval blockades and the chaos of the war, their ship is diverted. They actually find themselves stranded in ports that are under active bombardment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they face the very real daily threat of being captured and sold into slavery by privateers or simply being killed by a stray cannonball.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the hero's journey. Think about the classic mythological structure, right? The hero must cross a threshold of profound danger, enter the abyss where survival is in doubt, and return transformed.
Yes.
The physical, life-and-death stakes on those stormy, war-torn seas are acting as a perfect mirror for the internal stakes Nachman was facing.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. He couldn't conquer his internal chaos until he navigated the external chaos. And against staggering odds, he survives the crossing. He arrives in the Holy Land.
Geographically, he spends several months there, visiting the coastal city of Haifa, the ancient city of Tiberias by the Sea of Galilee, and most importantly, the mountain city of Safed, all of these located in present-day Israel. And Safed is the key here, isn't it?
Safed is the epicenter. For centuries, it had been the absolute historic center of Jewish mysticism known as the Kabbalah.
For our listeners who might just recognize that word from pop culture, what exactly is the Kabbalah in this context?
At its core, the Kabbalah is the esoteric framework of how the infinite, unknowable God interacts with the finite physical universe. And a major concept in the Kabbalah, specifically the tradition that came out of Safed, involves the idea of the shattered vessels.
Okay, let's unpack that because it connects perfectly to his depression.
Exactly. The mystical concept suggests that at the dawn of creation, the divine light was too powerful for the vessels meant to hold it. So the vessels shattered, and sparks of divine light fell down, getting trapped in the dark, messy, physical world.
Right.
The goal of humanity is to descend into that darkness, find those trapped sparks, and elevate them back to the light.
It's a cosmic justification for his entire psychological worldview.
Yes.
He had been teaching that you have to go into the darkness of depression to find the hidden light.
Yeah.
Now, standing in Safed, breathing the air of the ancient mystics, he realizes this isn't just a coping mechanism for his sadness. It was the fundamental architecture of the universe.
And that realization triggered an absolute psychological rebirth. Standing in those physical spaces, combined with the extreme trauma of the journey required to get there, completely crystallized his philosophy.
How profound was this shift? Like, how did it change him day to day?
It was a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Later in his life, Nachman stated unequivocally that this journey was the dividing line of his existence. Yeah, he actually instructed his followers not to read the teachings he had written before the trip, claiming they were entirely insignificant compared to the supreme clarified insight he gained in Israel.
Wow. So he went into the fire, unsure of his ultimate authority, and he came out forged in steel. He returns to Ukraine, not just as a gifted young teacher with some radical ideas, he returns as an absolute, unshakable master. The doubt is gone.
But as history shows us time and time again, certainty is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
When you return to a highly traditional society with a radically new philosophy, and you possess absolute certainty that you are right, you don't make friends. You make powerful enemies.
Which sets the stage for the most turbulent, fiercely contested, and ultimately tragic period of his life. We're moving into the years following his return, specifically establishing his base in 1802.
Right. He returns and eventually settles in a town called Breslov, located in present-day Ukraine. This town becomes the permanent historical and spiritual center of his movement. This is why, to this day, he is universally known as Rabbi Nachman of Breslov.
So he establishes his court there, and his teachings hit their absolute peak of brilliance. But the target on his back is massive.
Let's break down this controversy, because it wasn't just mild theological disagreement. It was vicious. Why were the other leaders so threatened by him?
It was a perfect storm of three factors. First, his methods were highly disruptive. The establishment valued quiet, scholarly study and dignified prayer.
Right.
And Nachman was telling people to go scream their lungs out in the woods and dance like fools to fight off depression. To the conservative elite, this looked like utter madness.
He's undignified. It broke the decorum.
Exactly. Second, he was fiercely demanding of his followers. He had zero interest in casual attendees. He demanded rigorous honesty, constant self-examination, and extreme daily effort.
No half measures. Right. He was essentially telling the followers of other masters, your leaders are letting you off too easy. They are giving you a comfortable religion, and comfortable religion is dead.
Man, that's a direct insult to the neighboring leadership. You don't say that and walk away quietly. And what was the third factor?
His own ego, or rather his absolute conviction in his unique stature. Remember, he came back from the Holy Land devoid of doubt.
Right. Forged in steel.
He boldly asserted to anyone who would listen that he had achieved a level of spiritual understanding that was completely unprecedented for his generation. He called himself the ultimate righteous master, implying that the others were merely playing the part.
So if you are a rival Hasidic master leading a large community in the next town over, you look at this young upstart and you see incredible arrogance. You see a man undermining your authority, stealing your passionate youth, and practicing what looks like radical, chaotic mysticism.
And the backlash was severe. The sources document intense organized persecution. Neighboring communities boycotted him. Rival leaders issued fierce denunciation.
It got physical too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The hostility reached such physical peaks that Nachman was forced to uproot his family and his followers multiple times just to find a safe haven before finally settling in Breslov.
And as if fighting off the entire religious establishment wasn't exhausting enough, the external battles begin to pale in comparison to the absolute devastation happening inside his own home.
The contrast during these years in Breslov is heartbreaking. On one hand, his spiritual and intellectual output is soaring. He is delivering his most profound discourses.
Right.
On the other hand, his personal life is collapsing into unimaginable tragedy.
It starts with the children. Within a shockingly short period, he loses 2 of his infant sons. I mean, the grief of losing a child is something a person rarely recovers from. To lose 2 in quick succession is a world-shattering trauma.
And the tragedy accelerates. In 1807, his wife, Sasha, contracts tuberculosis.
Oh.
This is the woman he was married to at 13. She was his anchor. She supported him through his terrifying ascetic phases. She managed the household when he abandoned them to travel into a war zone in Israel. She endured the intense persecution and exiles, and she passes away.
And then The ultimate brutal irony. Shortly after burying his wife, Nachman begins coughing up blood.
Yeah.
He contracts tuberculosis himself. The disease that just destroyed his family is now actively eating away his own lungs.
He is only in his mid-30s. He is at the absolute zenith of his intellectual power, but his physical body is rapidly, undeniably failing.
Okay, let's look at this from a strictly sociological perspective. Because historically, when a religious movement is built around a highly charismatic leader, especially one who claims supreme, unique favor with God, the movement is incredibly fragile.
Yes.
When that leader is suddenly hit by relentless tragedy, when their children die, their spouse dies, they catch a fatal disease, and their enemies successfully drive them out of town.
The followers almost always scatter.
Right. The followers look at the facts on the ground and assume the leader is cursed. In a traditional mindset, extreme suffering is viewed as divine punishment. They assume the leader was a fraud, the magic is gone, and they abandon ship. So why didn't that happen in Breslov? Why did his followers stay faithfully by the bedside of a dying, exiled man?
It is a phenomenal question, and the answer reveals the absolute genius of his life's work. They didn't leave because he had spent the last decade preemptively building the exact psychological framework they needed to survive this moment.
He had already rewritten the rules of suffering.
Exactly. From the very beginning, he had aggressively taught them that suffering, darkness, and disease are not punishments. They are not signs of divine abandonment. And by integrating his own clinical depression into his theology, he had taught them that the true master must descend into the darkest pits of human agony to find the light.
So when they looked at him coughing up blood, grieving his wife and children, they didn't see a fallen prophet. They saw his theology playing out in brutal, real time.
His suffering validated his empathy. When a follower came to him struggling with grief or despair, and Nachman told them how to use joy as a weapon to fight it, it wasn't empty, hypocritical advice from an ivory tower. The master was bleeding with them.
But reality is closing in. The clock is ticking loudly. We are moving into the final stretch, the years 1807 to 1810. Nachman knows that tuberculosis is fatal. He knows his time is incredibly short.
Yes.
So he faces the ultimate dilemma of any great thinker. How do you ensure your incredibly complex, nuanced system of psychology and mysticism survives after your physical voice is gone?
Right, and you would expect a scholar of his caliber, steeped in the dense textual tradition of Eastern Europe, to spend his final months frantically writing massive academic legal tomes.
But he makes a pivot that is just breathtaking in its creativity. Instead of writing dense academic text, the dying, brilliant rabbi begins telling fairy tales.
It is one of the most remarkable shifts in medium in literary history.
He starts weaving these wild, surreal, elaborate allegories. And it's brilliant because it functions exactly like a Trojan horse.
Oh, absolutely.
He takes the deepest, most complex psychological truths about depression, the ego, the search for meaning, and the Kabbalistic structure of the universe. And he hides them inside the simple, unassuming structure of a bedtime story.
A Trojan horse is the perfect analogy. Nachman possessed a masterful understanding of human defense mechanisms. He realized that direct instruction is often counterproductive.
And how so?
Well, if you sit someone down and say, your ego is destroying your happiness, or you need to confront your repressed trauma, what happens?
The bells are at the door. If your brain steps up, you get defensive, you rationalize, you block the lesson completely.
The intellect protects the ego. But a well-crafted story bypasses the intellect entirely. If you say, once upon a time, there was a king who banished his beloved daughter, the bouncer waves it right through. It's just a story. The listener drops their guard, their imagination takes over, and the story slips directly into the heart.
And once it's inside, it acts like a time-release capsule of wisdom. Our sources point out that he told 13 of these canonical epic tales during his final years. And these aren't simple fables with a neat little moral bow at the end.
No, not at all.
They are complex, surreal, almost dreamlike epics.
Let's look at one of the most famous, The Tale of the Lost Princess.
Okay.
In the story, a powerful king gets frustrated with his beloved daughter and accidentally wishes she would be taken away by the not good. Instantly, she vanishes. The king's viceroy, realizing the tragedy, sets out on a relentless, seemingly impossible quest to find her and bring her back.
And the quest is agonizing.
Yeah.
The viceroy finds her, but he keeps failing the tests required to free her. He falls asleep when he shouldn't, he gets distracted, she gets moved to an even more inaccessible castle made of pearls on a mountain of gold. It's a story of constant searching, failure, and the refusal to give up.
And beneath the surface of the fairy tale, it is a profound map of the human condition. The lost princess represents the divine spark, or perhaps a person's true, authentic self, which has been banished into the darkness of the chaotic world.
Right.
The viceroy is the human soul, desperately searching for connection. The failures he experiences mirror our own daily failures, our distractions, our depression.
It teaches resilience without ever using the word resilience. It tells the listener, you will fail to find the light today. You might fall asleep, but you must wake up tomorrow and continue the search.
Another masterpiece is The Tale of the Seven Beggars. It features a series of beggars who appear to young children with severe physical disabilities. One is blind, one is deaf, one has a stutter. But as the story unfolds, we learn that their disabilities are actually profound supernatural strengths.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the blind beggar isn't blind. He just refuses to look at the trivial, corrupt illusions of the physical world. He sees only the eternal truth.
It's a total inversion of how we judge value. He is teaching his followers that what society considers a weakness like sensitivity or poverty or even the vulnerability of depression might actually be a person's greatest spiritual asset.
Exactly.
These stories were so structurally sound and psychologically dense that they transcended his immediate religious circle. Decades later, they profoundly influenced major 20th century literary giants. Writers like Franz Kafka were deeply inspired by the surreal, searching, endless quest in Nachman's tales.
He essentially invented a new genre of mystical psychological literature while dying in his bed. He translated the infinite into the imaginary so that ordinary people could carry it around in their pockets.
But the physical reality was unforgiving. In 1810, just as his strength was failing completely, a massive fire swept through Breslov, destroying his home.
It was the final, brutal displacement of his life. Gravely ill, his house in ashes, he had to make a final choice about where to die.
And he makes a highly intentional choice. He asked to be moved to the city of Uman, located in present-day Ukraine.
Which was an unusual choice on the surface. I mean, Uman wasn't a stronghold of his movement. He didn't have a massive following there.
But the historical context of Uman is chilling. Decades earlier, in 1768, Uman had been the site of an unfathomably horrific massacre. During a rebellion, thousands of Jewish men, women, and children had been cornered in the city and brutally slaughtered. The city was essentially a mass graveyard.
A place of ultimate historical trauma.
Right. Nachman specifically requested to move there so he could be buried in the cemetery alongside the martyrs of the 1768 massacre. He told his followers that by resting his soul among them, he hoped to elevate their souls.
It is the final, ultimate application of his theology. Even in death, his focus is on descending into the deepest pit of despair, a literal site of mass murder to inject light.
In the autumn of 1810, thousands of his followers rushed to Uman. They gathered around his bed for Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year.
And in the Jewish tradition, the New Year is the Day of Judgment. It is the most solemn, powerful time of cosmic renewal.
And it is here, surrounded by weeping followers, that he establishes a covenant. He gives them his final lasting directive. He tells them, always gather at my grave on this specific holiday. Come to me on the New Year.
He makes a promise that echoes through history.
He tells them that even after his physical body is gone, his soul will not abandon them. He promised that if anyone came to his grave, gave a coin to charity, and recited the prayers, he would spiritually intercede for them. He essentially said, my body is failing, but I will drag you out of the darkness myself if you just show up for me.
He was ensuring that the connection, the psychological lifeline he had built for them, would not be severed by the grave.
Just a few weeks later, on October 16, 1810, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov passed away at the age of 38.
A life that burned out incredibly fast, but with blinding intensity.
Which brings us to the profound aftermath. As we discussed at the very beginning, this is the moment a movement usually crowns a new king.
Right.
The followers are grieving, they need direction. Who takes the reins?
The answer lies with his primary disciple, a man named Nathan of Nemirov.
Nathan was the crucial missing piece, wasn't he?
Nathan was the ultimate amplifier. He was a brilliant scholar in his own right, but he devoted his entire existence to serving as Nachman's scribe. For years, Nathan meticulously documented everything.
Wow.
He wrote down the formal teachings, the casual conversations, the intense psychological advice, and crucially, he wrote down the fairy tales exactly as Nachman told them, preserving their complex structure.
So when the master dies, Nathan possesses this massive, perfectly organized archive of Nachman's mind. And when the community looks around for a new leader, they look at Nathan, they look at the staggering depth of the writings he has preserved, and they realize something profound.
They realize they don't need a replacement.
They believe that Nachman's soul, his unique capacity to bridge the darkest human depression and the highest divine light, was a once-in-history phenomenon. You can't just elect someone to replace that.
No, you can't.
So they made the radical decision to remain connected to him entirely through his texts, his stories, and the practice of visiting his grave in Uman.
And that decision cemented their identity. The wider religious world mocked them, calling them the dead Hasidim because they refused to appoint a living leader. But to the followers of Breslov, Nachman wasn't dead.
Right.
His stories were alive, his advice on fighting depression was alive, and his promise to intercede for them on the new year was an active, living covenant.
And if you look at the modern-day legacy, it is impossible to argue that they were wrong. Over 2 centuries later, the movement didn't just survive, it exploded. Today, his burial site in Uman, Ukraine, is the destination of one of the largest annual religious pilgrimages in the world.
Tens of thousands of people flood into that city every single year for the Jewish New Year, fulfilling the exact directive he gave on his deathbed.
And the most fascinating part is that it isn't just his strict traditional followers making the journey. People from all walks of life, secular businessmen, struggling artists, people from across the globe travel to Uman. Why? Why does a man who died in 1810, a man who battled severe depression and told fairy tales about lost princesses, draw a massive modern crowd to a cemetery in Eastern Europe?
Because he provides a practical roadmap for the broken. He doesn't offer cheap grace or simple platitudes. He offers a gritty, hard-won methodology for surviving the human experience.
He lived in the dark, so we trust his instructions on how to find the flashlight.
Well said.
And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over for you, something that pulls his 18th century wisdom directly into our modern reality. We've spent the last hour tracing the life of a man who built a lasting, centuries-long movement by explicitly showcasing his deepest flaws, his crushing depression, and his vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And today, we spend our lives doing the exact opposite. We spend hours curating these flawless, perfectly filtered digital avatars on social media, terrified that if anyone sees our actual darkness, we will be abandoned.
But Nachman's life poses a radical question. If a modern influencer or a leader today dropped the curation and actively showed their ugliest, darkest struggles, would they lose their followers or would they accidentally start a religion?
Thank you for listening to Dor Lador, the Jewish History and Culture podcast. From generation to generation, the Jewish story has been carried through memory, faith, struggle, and renewal. Each generation inherits that story and adds another chapter. Until next time, keep exploring the past, questioning the present, and carry the story forward. Lador Vador, from generation to generation.